My name's John Zanardelli, and I'm the President and CEO of United Methodist Services for the Aging. We operate Asbury Heights. And I am absolutely thrilled to see the place filled to capacity, literally. And I'd like to welcome you to the inaugural Ruth E. Mikkel Lecture. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about Ruth, and actually maybe a little bit more about her son, Dr. Marlon Mikkel. So first off, I'm going to have Marlon and his lovely fiancée, Nancy Coleman, stand up so that you can see them. So it was through the generosity of Dr. Mikkel that this lecture series came to be. And I've known Marlon since 1993. I'm starting my 20th year here at Asbury, and Marlon was part of the board that hired me. So he's followed my career, and since he is a professor, he gives me grades. I've been graded, and so far I have a solid C, I think. But we're very appreciative of Marlon's generosity that made this lecture possible, and we hope to have more. Marlon is an emeritus member of our board. I knew Mrs. Mikkel, Ruth Mikkel. When we had board meetings here years ago, Marlon lived with his mother, or she lived with him, and he'd bring her here, and I remember how he doted on her. He took her coat off, he hung up her coat, he bought her a ticket and made sure she got her dinner, and sometimes she even brought friends of hers. Marlon's mother played a huge role in his life, and I would say he probably largely is who he is today because of his mother's influence. Marlon, I believe, grew up in Winburn. And Winburn, I found out, is that town in Cambria County, not far from Johnstown, was named for the Berwyn White Coal Company. And Marlon's dad, I believe, worked in maintenance for that organization, or I could be close. And Marlon's dad died when he was younger, and his mother sacrificed essentially her life so that her son could have an education. And Marlon is a product of the University of Pittsburgh. He spent 2 years at the Johnstown campus. Then he came to Oakland, where he earned his PhD in electrical engineering. He's a prolific researcher and an inventor. He has over 20 patents, and he's still going strong. He's still on the faculty. He's now a professor of electrical engineering, computer engineering, and several other engineering related disciplines. And so he's really done very well in his life, and he wanted to honor his mother's memory through this lecture series. So we thank you very much, Marlon. So I get to introduce the speaker this evening, Dr. Stephen M. Elbert, PhD, Master of Science in Public Health, and I get to give a little bit of an introduction to this talk. And Steve, Dr. Elbert, has entitled this Engineering a New and Better Old Age. Probably play on engineering because of Marlon being an engineer, but I would say that this lecture has a lot to do with what happens when longevity meets physiologic decline. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I mean. And I wrote my introduction before I even saw Dr. Albert's slides, and they tie quite nicely. So the good Lord who made us gave us too many of all of our organs that we need to survive. and to thrive. So think about it. We have 2 kidneys, we have 2 lungs, we have 2 eyes, we have 2 ovaries, we have 2 testicles, and you get it. And not only did he give us duplicates in a lot of cases of vital organs, he constructed the organs such that they have excess capacity built into them. I read in a somewhat scholarly book that we could lose 90% of our childhood kidney functioning and still be asymptomatic. We would not have symptoms. And so, and that's, by the way, this physiologic reserve is how we can remove an entire vital organ and survive quite nicely. That's why we can have organ donors that are live people that sometimes give their kidneys. And this excess capacity is called physiologic reserve. And that's a good thing. Now, what happened in the past, and when I'm talking about the past, I'm talking about maybe the late 19th century to the early 20th century, is we didn't have some of the problems that we have today with outliving our physiologic reserve. Because we were being felled earlier on by infectious diseases and chronic conditions. So long before our muscles reached the point where we could no longer walk or get out of a chair or get in and out of a bathtub, we were dead from something else. Infectious diseases or some untreated chronic diseases. Well, what's happened? Well, we've solved a lot of the infectious disease problems. We've solved a lot of the chronic disease problems, and medicine has propped us up quite nicely. And our lifestyle has gotten rather sedentary. And so there's a collision, so to speak, between physiologic reserve and unprecedented longevity. Now, if I stop the story right there, it would be pretty depressing. You're thinking, wow, so here's my choice. I can die young upright or live to an old age and not be upright. Well, that's where Steve comes in, and that's the good news, that we have evidence that behavior, your behavior, plays a big role in how you and how all of us age. And genetics plays a smaller role than we had once thought. And that is good news. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Elbert before I call him to the podium. Steve is a gerontologist, which is a social scientist, as opposed to a geriatrician, which is a physician that specializes in care of the older adult. Steve has his PhD in anthropology from the University of Chicago. Any of you know about the University of Chicago? If you know anything about the University of Chicago, only students that go there are the ones that are highly motivated, because they give them a t-shirt on their arrival that says, University of Chicago, where fun goes to die. Steve had a lot more hair and he was a lot more fun, but he went to Chicago and he lasted and got his PhD in anthropology, which is the study of human beings, sometimes going backwards, and you can study how they've culturally evolved or how they physically evolved or how they've sociologically evolved. Steve then went to Columbia and he got his master's degree in epidemiology. I met Steve. He's a population level public health researcher. And I met him when he was recruited from the faculty of the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University to join the faculty as a full professor in the School of Public Health at University of Pittsburgh, the Department of Behavioral and Community Health Sciences. And most recently, he was appointed the chair of our department. And he is a seminal researcher with over 100 peer-reviewed papers, 3 books, one of which is in its 2nd edition, and it's called Public Health and Aging, Maximizing Function and Well-Being. It's an excellent book, excellent. And I know right now he is undertaking a falls prevention study and received a major grant about a year or so ago. So without any further ado, I would call Dr. Stephen M. Elbert to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It was a lovely introduction. It's a great, great pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the Mikkel family as well. It's not often you get a chance to give an inaugural lecture, which is wonderful, and I hope this is the beginning of a series that continues and brings practical progress in gerontology to the settings where older people live. But I have in the middle the School of Public Health, and some of you know that it's changing daily. We're getting a new laboratory tower. And we have a head CT scan. We have the famous animals that have taught us so much about aging: yeast, fruit flies, C. elegans, a particular roundworm, and mice. And then we have some images of aging. You can see the changes of skin and the changes in the anatomy that come with age, and also the very healthy elderly. A woman here with her leg in a place I don't think I could even put my leg that high up. So there is quite a range of aging going on. And let me dispense right away with the question people always ask, because it's very easily answered. How do you live to be very old and healthy? The answer is simple. Be a woman and choose parents who've lived very long. If you do those 2 things, you've got most of the battle won. But unfortunately, that's what we can't do very well. So let me go right into it. I have a joke, just because that's always a good idea. It teaches us something about aging. There's an old Doberman, a dog chasing rabbits, and he's lost. Before long, he hears a panther heading rapidly in his direction with the intention of having lunch. The old Doberman thinks, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. He notices some bones on the ground close by, so he settles down to chew on a bone with his back to the approaching panther. Just as the panther is about to leap, the old Doberman exclaims loudly, "Boy, that was one delicious panther. I wonder if there are any more around here." Hearing this young panther halts this attack in mid-strike, a look of terror in his face. He slinks away. "Whew," says the panther, "that was close. That old Doberman nearly had me." Meanwhile, a squirrel who had been watching the whole scene from a nearby tree figures he can put this knowledge to good use and trade it for protection from the panther. So off he goes, he catches up with the panther, he spills the beans and strikes a deal for himself with the panther. The young panther is furious at being made a fool of and says, "Here, squirrel, hop on my back and see what's going to happen to that conniving canine." Now the old Doberman sees the panther coming with the squirrel on his back and thinks, "What am I going to do now?" But instead of running, the dog sits down with his back to his attackers, pretending he hasn't seen them yet, and just when they get close enough to hear, the old Doberman says, "Where's that squirrel? I sent him off an hour ago to bring me another panther." Moral of the story, don't mess with old dogs. So there is some things about aging which are good, something like wisdom and experience. There's some things about aging which are not so good. And the thing we want to do in today's lecture is lay that out a little bit. And of those things which are not so good, the declines that John mentioned, what can we do about them? What have we learned from medicine and public health? Now,